Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. This is John Baker, IT Pro Evangelist with Microsoft Corporation. My blog is blogs.technet.com/John Baker. And this is the final part in a 5-part series on User State Migration Tool, automatically migrating your user settings during the Windows 7 upgrade. And part 5 is looking at the offline user state capture. The User State Migration Tool 4.0 series that we're doing here is split up into 5 parts. Part 1 is the overview of the User State Migration Tool itself. Part 2 is we'll take a look at what's new in the USMT 4.0. Part 3 is the USMT scenarios. Part 4 is the hard link migration. And then finally on Part 5 we'll take a look at using the USMT for doing offline user state capture. And today we're going to be finishing off with Part 5, taking a look at the offline user state capture. Offline migration is a new scenario in the USMT 4.0, and this enables the scan state tool to run inside a different Windows operating system than the Windows operating system from which scan state is gathering files and settings from. There are 2 primary offline scenarios enabled in USMT 4.0, and you can see them up there, the Windows PE and the Windows Old. So in the case of Windows PE, the scan state tool is run from within the Windows PE environment, gathering files and settings from an offline Windows operating system on the same machine. In the case of Windows Old, or Windows.old rather, the scan state tool can now gather files and settings from the Windows Old directory that is created during the Windows installation on a partition that already contains a previous installation of Windows. So for example, if you installed Windows 7 on a machine that previously had Windows Vista installed on that drive, what happens is it creates a new Windows Old directory, and in that Windows Old directory, Vista and all its previous settings and files, etc., are all stored in that Windows Old directory. And so we just run the scan state tool against that Windows Old directory and pull out the data. So this new feature in the USMT 4.0 has a direct impact on reducing the cost of deploying Windows 7 when the USMT is used to gather and restore user states. So one, it reduces complexity. So in computer refresh scenarios, migrations from the Windows Old directory reduce complexity by eliminating the need for the scan state tool to be run before the operating system is deployed. Also, migrations from the Windows Old directory enable scan state and load state to be run successively on the same machine. Improving performance. When USMT runs in an offline Windows PE environment, it has better access to the hardware resources, and this may increase performance on older machines with limited hardware resources and numerous installed software applications. The new recovery scenario, in scenarios where the machine no longer restarts properly, in other words, you're unable to boot up on that C drive, it might be possible to still gather that user state using the scan state tool from within Windows PE. So what will migrate offline? Well, in the offline situation, the user data and settings that migrate offline are similar to the online migration. We get data and registry settings specified in the big XML file. We get user accounts. We get application settings. We get a limited set of the operating system settings. We get EFS files. And we also get Internet Explorer favorites. So let's take a quick look at the type of commands we'd have to do a scan state from Windows PE. Remember, we had to tell it the working directory, so we'd have to do a set USMT_working_dir equals, and then in this case here, I'm going to put it into the d:\USMT/. So that's I'm setting my working directory for the scan. And then the command line switch, we would do obviously the scanstate.exe, and the switch that would go with it is the /offline_windir, and then the colon, and then we'd have to tell it where the Windows directory is that we want to do the scan on. So in this case, d:\Windows. So let's take a look at the Windows Old offline migration. So what do we do here? So we're either going to be logged on to Windows Vista on Windows or Windows 7. So we run scan state from within whichever OS we're logged on to there. And then we go through a migration process where we gather and apply the hard link migration store, and then after we've applied that hard link migration store, we then delete the hard link migration store. And remember, we have that USMT utils.exe utility to delete that hard link migration store after we've retrieved or recovered the user's data. This streamlines the deployment process. Why? Because it all occurs on one machine and we can do the scan state and the load state sequentially on the same machine. Significantly reduces the risk of data loss because everything is on the same machine. It's not being put across the wire or onto another drive. And then also, if you have a BitLocker encrypted drive, you need to disable BitLocker so that we can have access to the windows.old folder for the scan state and load state utilities. Obviously, once you've done the migration, you can then re-enable BitLocker. So disabling BitLocker doesn't unencrypt the drive, it just disables the functionality of BitLocker while we do some offline stuff. And here's how we do a scan state from Windows old. So the command line switch obviously is scanstate.exe, and then space offline win old is the switch, and then colon, and then after the colon we have to tell it where the Windows directory is that we're doing the scan from. So in this case I'm doing it from the c:\windows.old/Windows directory. So let's go and do a demonstration now. What we're going to do here is perform an offline user state capture in a Windows old directory that I have in my new Windows 7 deployment. The one final demo I want to do here is to show you the offline migration scenario that's now available with USMT 4.0. Remember, this enables the scan state tool to run inside a different operating system or different Windows operating system than the Windows operating system that it's actually scanning and gathering the files and settings from. Remember from the slides, there are two primary offline scenarios enabled in USMT 4.0. One is the WinPE, and that's where we boot up on a WinPE or boot up into a WinPE environment and we gather files and settings on an offline Windows operating system so that that machine is not booted up in Windows. We're actually booting up in WinPE and scanning that offline Windows operating system. The other option, which is what I'm going to do here, in my Windows 7 machine here, I have a Windows old directory. And what we can do there is we can use the scan state tool to gather files and settings from that Windows old directory that was created during our new installation of Windows 7, and then we'll save that off. So let me move over to my machine here. I'm going to come in, and just to show you I have a Windows old directory, I'm going to open this up, and there it is right there on my C drive. You can see my Windows old. So let me come back over here. I'm going to do a scan state. So scan state, I'm going to tell it where I'm going to put it. So that's Seattle-DC-01 public and user state underscore test is where I'll put it. So then I do the offline win old switch, tell it where that offline win old is, so it's in windows.old/Windows. I'm going to do a /auto switch so that I don't have to type in MIG user and MIG app XML. That just automatically does those again, if you recall, does it with a verbosity level of 13. I'm going to do a /o in case I already have one out there because I want to override it. /c to continue on soft errors. And my final switch is the /vsc. I want to use the volume shadow copy in case there's any files out there that are locked. So let me press enter. And now it started so now I'm not actually scanning my my Windows on Windows 7 here. I'm actually scanning my Windows old. So this is the old version of Windows that was on here. I'm scanning the user profiles that are in that old version of Windows. So I'll give this a few seconds. Shouldn't take too long. And while that's going, let me come over here and I'm going to switch to my server. So I'll go to Seattle-DC-01/public. And here's the one that it's creating for me. So let me switch back. It should be nearly finished. Oh, it's finished. So there it is. And here, if I open it up, there's my easy transfer file that got created from that scanning that windows.old directory. Okay, so that concludes this demonstration. And here in my call to action and resources slide, at the top I have my online presence. So I've got a blog, blogs.technet.com/John Baker. I also have a landing page for deployment essentials on the Microsoft.com/events/series/deployment essentials.aspx. And that's where I have my screencast videos hosted. And then in the middle of that slide, you'll see the Windows Automated Installation Kit, or Wake, for Windows 7, which is the latest version of the Wake. And I've put a bit.ly link up there for it, which is bit.ly/ lowercase fp, uppercase N, 90 lowercase z. So that will get you to the Wake for Windows 7. And then there's also a Windows 7 walkthrough of the user state migration tool. And again, I put a bit.ly link up there, and it's bit.ly/ lowercase fcz, uppercase I, lowercase x, 6. And this concludes part 5 of my 5-part series on the user state migration tool, automatically migrating user settings during a Windows 7 upgrade. Thanks for joining me, and I'll hope to see you in future screencasts.